What is up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm Jacob Turner. He's Andrew Jones, and AJ. We're here for another episode of the UNC basketball show, and a lot to talk about in this show, as there always is when we hop on a podcast to talk Carolina basketball. Obviously, on Tuesday night, Carolina losing at home to Clemson 80-76. Disappointing night for North Carolina all the way around, especially coming off that win over Duke. We're going to talk about that game a little bit, rehash that game a little bit. I want to get some of your insights in things from it. I know you talked about it on 3 Things with Chelsea. Go check that out after this video is done. But I want to dissect that game a little bit more and kind of talk about what it might mean heading in to another tough 2-game stretch against Miami and Syracuse on the road coming up next, which we'll talk about a little bit later on as well. But AJ, the fact of the matter is Carolina right now lost 2 of their last 3 games. The loss out on the road to Georgia Tech, poor loss for North Carolina, and a loss at home last night to Clemson, a game in which it was pretty evident from the jump that Carolina was just not ready to play. So I want to start with some of the quotes that came out last night, some from Hubert, some from the players in terms of preparation for the game, practicing poorly on Monday, bad shoot around on Tuesday, some players said, and then showing up late to warm-ups, a couple players as well. I think that, for me, illustrates how poorly Carolina started, where just felt like coming off that Duke game, you used the term fat and happy a lot, and we use the term human nature a lot. And, AJ, for me, last night was a prime example of how human nature can creep into athletics and creeps into athletics all the time. Because last night, for me, AJ, was a human nature game at its finest.
Yeah. Well, fat and happy is a product of human nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a product of a club that just, I don't know. I don't think human nature is a part of just not being focused, choosing not to be focused. I think that's a choice. Human nature is what it is in terms of sometimes things you just are affected by things. Sometimes we create our own obstacles. That's human nature. We do it in our lives. I do it in mine. You do it in yours. Everybody watching, they do that sometimes. We all know exactly the specifics of that. Mm-hmm. This was different because they knew it for a while and still didn't fix it. I think that if there's anything that's alarming about this is that Sunday they knew it. Hubert knew it. Told them. Monday they had to stop practice again because they knew it, and Hubert told them this was going to happen. Mm-hmm. Tuesday shoot around still hadn't changed. Guys show up late for the warm-ups before the game Tuesday night, and that goes past human nature. Those are ultimately conscious decisions that are made, and you pay a hard price for it. I know the season's long. I consider this period of the season, the dog days. From a journalistic standpoint, it's very challenging. It's for the players, it is, because you've played 20-something games and you look ahead and there's like still 8-9 games left in the regular season, another month plus, and then there's the ACC tournament. It's like the NCAA tournament isn't really right there just yet. It's still a ways away. So the dog days, sometimes this stuff happens. That's why you see a lot of the highly ranked teams stumbling from that mid-January to mid-February period. And then they start turning it on a lot unless they just stumbling and continue to go in the wrong direction. I think that's what's happening to this team some. And they're a club that has been pushed a lot. They haven't had a lot of blowout wins other than a few at home. They've had a lot of games where they had to turn it on the last 5 minutes, 7 minutes. We've talked about their ability to close and how good they are late in games. They pull away, they put the foot on the throat, all that stuff. They've had to do that a lot. And they had a very challenging schedule in which the day of the Duke game, they had played 4 home games in 62 days. And now they're in a stretch where they have one more home game until March. They got to go to Miami. They got to go to Syracuse. They host Virginia Tech. They're off for a week. Then they have Virginia on the road. And then they have 3 straight at home against State, Notre Dame, and Miami, in not that order. And I guess maybe one of them is at the end of February, but this is a challenging stretch. And I just think that beating Duke gave these guys an opportunity and maybe an excuse to just sort of let their hair down. Armando was asked if they stayed out late Saturday night, and he said yes. And he immediately responded and said, but we had a 6 o'clock practice Sunday. So they knew in their mind, we've all been there, man. You've been there. We've all been there. Well, they calculate, okay, I can go out and I can hang out and stay out this late, and I can do this, I can do that, and I'll be fine by 6 o'clock when we have practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that stuff's an anchor, man. When you do some of those things in season, it's an anchor. It's not, you're out of routine suddenly, physically, emotionally, mentally. You don't get the right rest. And then suddenly it's hard to catch up because one day leads into another. Now they're off Wednesday because they have to have the mandatory day off, and it's good. And I would imagine maybe this might be one of those days where Hubert doesn't have guys come into the office. To just leave them on there and let them think about it themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, human nature. But I also think these were conscious decisions that were poor decisions that were made by the team collectively. They knew what was going on. RJ talked to them about it in practice on Monday. They said, guys, we got to get ready. This team could beat us. It fell on deaf ears. So they lost. They deserved to lose. It would have been probably bad long-term if they would have found a way to win that game, because just like with Georgia Tech, if you deserve to lose, you need to lose. I think in this point in the season, because you still have to find more things to learn. You still have to add more to the tool chest. And winning a game like that Tuesday night, I think would have told them it's okay. You got away with it. You know, it's that there are a lot of things that people get away with. And once you do it once, you're like, well, maybe I can do it again. Or maybe not consciously you say that, but it kind of seeps into your DNA a little bit. So I think the right thing occurred to this team. They deserved to lose. They did lose. We'll see how they respond. And now they got to go play an incredibly desperate, angry team that could be in disarray. We don't know. We don't know what the deal is with Miami, but place is going to be full, and it's going to be basically a fork in the road game in Miami season. If Miami doesn't win that game, then the Hurricanes are going to have to win the ACC tournament probably to get in. If they win that game, they still have work to do, but they'll be heading in the right direction. So the Tar Heels are going to get everything a team that has a lot of dudes from the Final Four back. And so they have to get their minds right. Tar Heels have to show up to practice Thursday, just swatting away what just happened and determined to not allow anything like that to occur again. Because if they do again, they have another one of these, then that starts to be a bigger issue.
Yeah, I completely agree. A couple of things. There's a word that keeps as you were talking, there was a word that keeps popping up in my head, and it's complacency. It's what it kind of felt like last night. I'm like, well, you know, we beat Duke, feeling good about ourselves right now. We can go out and party for a little bit. You know, we got practice at 6. We're good. And it resulted in a really poor start to the game. And again, we were talking about it off camera of, I thought Carolina was really poor on Tuesday night. I thought Clemson played really well for big spurts of the game on Tuesday night. Yet, how many opportunities did Carolina have, particularly in that second half, where they cut the game close, they tied the game at one point, and they were just never able to get over that hump. I think that shows, okay, it's a bad loss, got to learn from it, but it still shows the high end that I think this Carolina team has too. But one other thing I want to say on it, I looked at the box score last night, and this complacency word keeps popping up. Cormac Ryan, 1 for 10, continues to shoot really poorly. I know he hadn't hit some shots against Duke. They were big. I thought he played pretty well against the Blue Devils, but he was poor last night, finished with just 2 points. Elliot Cadeau, we're seeing him play like a freshman a little bit over the past couple of weeks, getting in foul trouble, making some simple mistakes that he wasn't making, not having the confidence to shoot. And, you know, really, I don't know when the last time he's hit a 3, but it's been a while. I thought Harrison Ingram,
he has not hit a shot outside the lane, I think, since December.
Yeah, because we were talking about that during the Duke game. We were like going back and forth.
I ran a piece last week where I articulated every one of his baskets going back to the start of ACC play again with Pitt. And they were all layups. A couple of them were floaters. He's had a couple floaters in the lane. The rest of it layups right at the rim. He's not hitting a jumper. When he gets the ball and it looks like he's going to shoot from the perimeter, it's almost like a vacuum. Everything goes back defensively into the lane.
Yeah.
The defense doesn't challenge him at all. Let me comment on the complacency thing real fast, and then I want you to continue on with what you were saying.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I want to hit on some of those things you talked about, but I want to lose the complacency thing. Here's the thing about complacency is that when you allow something like that to enter into the equation, it's almost gets to the point where you can't control it. Complacency to me in a situation like this is the fact they just weren't ready. Weren't ready for a million reasons. So even though they tied the game at 70, Carolina went into this game with, a third of a tank of gas. And to beat Clemson, they had to drive across the desert where there's no gas stations. And they got to a certain point and ran out of gas. They just didn't have it because they only had enough in them to handle so many minutes of the game because they weren't fully ready to play. As opposed to Clemson, who had a full tank of gas, and they're able to get to the finish line because it was 70-70. Clemson went on a 7-0 run. Clemson had 3 offensive rebounds in the next 3 minutes, and they scored off of each one. They got 6 points. They got a putback by Hall. Gerard got an offensive rebound, got rid of the ball, got it back and hit a 3. And then there was a free throw after an offensive rebound by Ian Shefflin. So if Clemson had 6 offensive rebounds in the last 8:59 of the game. So that's a team with gas in the tank against a team without gas in the tank.
Yeah.
That's what happened there. So complacency isn't just, well, they started poorly, and if it wasn't 15-2, they would have won the game. They lost the game for a lot of reasons. It wasn't just a 15-2 start. It was also the zone offense. They were terrible. Clemson goes to a zone after Wojcik gets a 3 to make it 23-17. Carolina goes 2 for its next 13. And Clemson turns a 6-point game into a 16-point game because Carolina didn't have it on the other end. They weren't able to offset poor offensive stretches with excellent defense, which we've seen many times this year. And there are times we've seen poor defense offset by great offense. There was no synchronicity in any of that stuff. So complacency and just not being ready hit them in a lot of areas. It wasn't just the 15-2 start. It was throughout, and they just didn't have enough game, and they were trying to win on a shoestring budget, basically, and they couldn't do it.
Last thing I want to say about this game, then we'll move on. I was looking at the box score this morning and last night, and even watching the game, and I thought Carolina's poorest performers were guys that had never played in the Duke game before, had never experienced that before. You look at Ingram, 11 points, 4 for 7, decent shooting night. But when you look at what he did against Duke, for me, he was nowhere close to the level he played at against Duke, particularly in the first half where I thought he was really poor. Cormac Ryan, 1 for 10 for the floor, 2 points. Carolina is not going to win many basketball games if Cormac Ryan is giving you 2 points. He has to produce more than that. Elliot Cadeau, I talked about, just 20 minutes, just 5 points, 2 for 6 from the floor. A little bit of not necessarily having those foul issues last night with some cheap fouls he was giving away to. He was far from his best. Even looking to the bench a little bit, Jalen Wither, I'm not going to throw Wojcik in there. I thought he provided a little bit of a spark off the bench a little bit, but didn't even
7.6 rebounds. He played well.
Yeah,
he got a couple steals. He played well.
But when you look at the Duke game, didn't even get in that game. So I can't really correlate it to that game. Yeah. Jalen Withers played a little bit in the Duke game, just 5 minutes, no points, basically did nothing for the Tar Heels last night. So when I'm looking, those 4 guys in particular, I'm looking at these guys and I'm saying, okay, complacency creeps in a little bit, but I'm saying these guys were very poor last night. We're probably Carolina's poorest performers. Carolina's best performers last night were Armando Bacot and RJ Davis, 2 guys that have experienced the rivalry at the highest stage, especially in the NCAA tournament a couple years ago. I'm not saying they were both great, but they were the guys that were keeping Carolina, and they were the only reason Carolina had a chance to win that game in the second half. But when I'm looking at everybody else, I'm kind of sitting here and I have this theory of, okay, everybody that had played significant minutes against Duke that had never played in the rivalry before were really, really poor against Clemson. And it almost made me think, okay, is it a situation of not knowing how to handle a quick turnaround after such an emotional game that none of these players have ever experienced before? And even, heck, they've even told us that in some of the post-game interviews, Harrison Ingram, Cormac Ryan in particular. It feels like those guys just didn't know how to handle that quick turnaround, got a little bit complacent of me throwing that in there. That's kind of the word that keeps popping in my head. And it resulted in a poor performance overall from them on Tuesday night. So how much do you factor that in of just experiencing something that is so emotional like the Carolina Duke game, coming out on top, and then 3 days later having to play a good Clemson team coming to town and just not knowing how to handle it, not being ready to play that game? Do you think that plays a factor in it as well?
Yeah, I think there's something to say for that, no doubt about it. I will say I don't think RJ played well.
Yeah,
RJ was 7 for 22. RJ is remember I told you a few weeks ago the concern about being too reliant on RJ?
Yeah.
And RJ maybe being too reliant on himself. Well, he's starting to take forced shots and rush shots. Teams are defending him a little differently now. Duke face guarded him everywhere. Clemson was very physical with him. Clemson is going to they're going to hip check you a lot. I mean, Clemson's guys probably appreciate hockey. They got a minor league hockey team in Greenville, and they probably go watch those guys play, and they take note of those hip checks, right? And the Clemson does that well. And they how many times did RJ hit the floor? And it didn't help, as I sidebar from that very quickly, that Carolina switched way too much defensively. I don't know how many times RJ found himself on Ian Shefflin. Shefflin's going to throw him into the rafters every time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing against RJ, but Shefflin's a beast. He's going to throw him into the rafters. I look down, and RJ is trying to box out PJ Hall, and RJ's falling to the floor, and he's getting whacked in the face and all that kind of stuff. The switching was a problem. I think Hubert needs to pull back on that. When they were excellent defensively for a while, they had gone away from the over switching. There were a couple times last night where there were two Clemson players next to each other being guarded by two Tar Heels, and the Clemson players moved a little bit, and the Tar Heels switched, and there was no need to switch.
Yeah.
They got that in their mind. I'm just not a big fan of switching. I think it breeds laziness, personally. Clemson wasn't switching, and Clemson was a better team defensively. So RJ has taken he took a lot of forced shots last night, 7 for 22. He was 2 for 10 in the first half. He had 4 points in the first half, or 6 points in the first half last night. I don't think he played that great. Armando must not have been one of the guys that was late, because Armando was ready to go. But this goes back to my point about Armando, when everybody was complaining that Armando wasn't scoring much and they were calling him a dog and everything else. You can get 24 and 13 from Armando, but it doesn't mean you're going to win. You need other guys to step up. So you're talking about the other guys that need to step up. One of them has to be a guy that had never played in one of these games before. I think Ingram needs to shoot more. He was 4 for 7 last night, or I guess we're recording this Wednesday. He was 3 for 5 from 3.
Yeah,
and he hit 5 for 9 against Duke. So in the last 2 games, he's 8 for 14 from 3. He's almost too unselfish. He needs to recognize, and you could tell early when Cormac misses a couple early and he's short and he's rushing the shot, he's not going to hit that night. So Harrison just needs to absorb those shots. He needs to take them himself. Cormac is a really good shooter, but it is obvious that there's some frustration seeping in and maybe some confidence stuff. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how long you've played. Confidence is going to be a factor sometimes. When he misses, he's always been a clapper when he misses, like that one clap.
Yeah.
Does that a lot. But the claps before, earlier in the year, the head was up. Now the head's down when he claps. It's a small little thing, but it's something that when you're at every game and you're watching all these different things, you're not always watching the ball you see. And that's what I see from him. And I'm not alone in that. There's one or two others in the media that cover every game that are seeing this as well. So his misses are starting to lead to other misses, I think. And because of that, other guys have to take shots. He does a lot of really good things on the floor to help him win. Everyone's beating him up right now. I don't think people appreciate that he's a really good player who's just struggling with his shot right now. And he probably could use a couple of games, or a game where he just loses himself in the game. If he only shoots a few times, that's fine. Someone else has to absorb those shots, because they need a third scorer. They don't have one. We've talked about this for a while. They're in February now. This team could get better because it can add a third consistent scorer. As well as Harrison played against Duke, that's the only time since the UConn game he scored more than 13 points. And the reality is he scored 13 once. The rest of the time he was at 11 and fewer. That's a 14-game stretch where he's been over 13 once and he's been over 11 twice. So that's not a third score. 11 points a game is not a third score for a national championship team. A third score has to be in the 14.5 range.
Yeah.
And he would get closer to being there if he hit his free throws. If he drew, I don't even know if he went to the line last night. He was more of a jump shooter. He didn't back anybody in because he's being guarded by Shefflin, and Shefflin's not going to let him back him in. That's a bad matchup for Harrison to use his whole bag. He was sort of turned into a jump shooter, and he's not a launcher. He's not a chucker. He's not a guy that's going to shoot a ton from the outside. He's very economical with his shot selection. And because of that, he only shot 7 times. And he went out for about 4 minutes with the cramps. Both legs were cramped. Both thighs were cramping up. So he only missed a little bit of time. He needs to be a little more assertive in taking shots. He's got a pretty quick release, and got good range. He can shoot it from 22, 23, 24 feet. And I think that for them moving forward, that's one of the things they could take from last night. That is a positive in that, hey, you need to do more of this, because most of what they did Tuesday night was you need to do less of this. Yeah. Here's a situation where you need to do more of this. He needs to shoot more because they need that third score. And RJ needs to shoot less. RJ has attempted 60 shots in the last 3 games. That's the most shots he's attempted in a 3-game stretch. He's 20 for 60. What's crazy is he's 10 for 37 inside the arc. He's putting up a lot of wild shots inside the arc, highly contested shots because they're not coming from elsewhere, and he feels like he has to do almost too much right now. He needs to pull back, and Harrison needs to push forward with the shot selection.
Agreed. Couldn't agree more. And yeah, just to clarify too, I didn't think RJ was great last night, but I thought he was poor.
He scored.
But in the second half, he was the guy, like we've seen, that if anybody needs to kind of hit a big shot, it tends to be him. So,
but it took there were a lot of big shot situations. I agree with you, but there were some big shot situations in which he took poor shots.
Yeah. I completely agree.
It was the first time this year where you look down, it's like, okay, he's trying to do too much. And it's not that there's a chest pounding, I'm going to get mine kind of thing. It's because there was not a tremendous amount of faith in the rest of the guys around him. And he needs to get that. And if Harrison's a little bit more assertive shooting the ball, he'll get that faith. Cormac wasn't hitting. Those guys know it. You pass up a good shot to get a great shot. And sometimes Cormac's the great shot. But if he's 1 for 10 and the one is a floater, maybe shot. Because they know when he starts poorly, he rarely gets it going. That's just going to be a poor night. So that's part of it. That's all part of the equation.
Agreed. Couldn't agree more. Trimble, too, just to hit on him for a second, thought he was a big miss last night, out with an upper body injury. I think we've seen countless times this year where just him coming in and doing what he does, not only getting up and down the court and making things happen, particularly on defense. I think there's been countless times this year where he's come in and put that, because he's such a good on-ball defender, he's kind of changed the mood and vibe around the team at times by doing things on defense that other players maybe, I'm not going to say aren't capable of doing, but I think his high end on defense on the ball can kind of lift his teammates a little bit. I thought that was a big miss for Carolina last night. I'm not saying if Seth Trimble plays last night that Carolina wins the game by any means, but I do think, just to hit on him for a second, there were times last night where I'm like, man, Seth Trimble's in the game right now. Maybe he makes something happen on defense, gets him out in transition, hits a shot, gets to the rim, makes a layup that can get this team elevated a little bit. Thought he was a big miss.
Yeah, the other time they'd been down double figures at home was against Florida State, and Seth played 14 minutes, almost all in the second half, and he was plus 24. He was a big part of the press that led the comeback in that game. So they didn't have that last night. And you're right. He could have given him exactly what you said. But I asked Hubert after the game about not having Seth, where the effect was. And Hubert said Seth would have played, it wouldn't have mattered. I think that was Hubert saying, we're going to lose the game no matter what. They had all hands on deck. We're going to lose the game because they lost the game at midnight Saturday, at 2 a.m. Sunday. They lost the game when they woke up Sunday, when they practiced Sunday. They lost it through all 24 hours of Monday and all day Tuesday leading up to the game. This was a game that they lost so many times before they're ever suited up. So I think he, in hindsight, recognized that. And he told them, it's going to happen. You guys aren't focused. This is going to happen. So Seth ultimately probably wouldn't have made a difference. And again, I think this is the best thing for this team is you cannot be rewarded when you don't do things the right way. You can't. So now they have to push the restart. They have every reason in the world to be fired up going down to Coral Gables, but they're going to go into a situation where a team is as desperate as can be, and they got a lot of cats that can score on that club. Yeah,
let's look ahead. Good segue to the last thing we're going to talk about before we head on out of here. Let's look ahead real quick to Carolina's next 2 games. Trip to Miami on Saturday, and then a trip to Syracuse the following Tuesday. So a very similar turnaround and schedule to what they saw last week, obviously playing Duke on Saturday and then Clemson on Saturday night. Miami 69 in the net right now, like you mentioned, desperate for a win. A win against Carolina doesn't just get them into the tournament, but like you said, a loss to Carolina at home probably means they're going to have to go win the ACC tournament as poorly as they've been, because you look at their schedule, man, they've got some bad losses on there. And then Syracuse, very interesting situation with Syracuse. I know Benny Williams kicked off the team earlier on Tuesday, a weird situation that they're in Monday, excuse me. Weird situation.
I guess they did it Monday, announced it Tuesday, I think.
Yeah.
They did it Monday.
I think it came out Tuesday morning, at least, when I started seeing some.
Yeah, in fact, what we were talking about it. I'm sorry to cut you off, but
no,
I think this is important because Carolina plays them next week. Adrian Autry every Monday morning, all the coaches do 10 minutes on an ACC conference call on Zoom with the media. And Autry, he basically said, look, if none of my scholarship guys want to do it, I'll put the walk-ons in and start them. And like 15 minutes after he got off the conference call, Benny Williams was kicked off the team.
Yeah. They're in a weird situation right now, 87th in the net, but always going to Syracuse.
But that could be good for them. Sometimes stuff like that works.
Absolutely. Can kind of,
and they got to go up there, and that'll be tough. But they got to be ready for Miami.
It's a tough game.
Miami pulled an absolute no-show in Charlottesville. In fact, it was so bad. Jim Larinaga didn't even meet with the team. He sat on the bench. The team was up over here, and he sat on the bench. He's looking at a laptop. That club's got talent. There's no excuse for Wooga Poplar and Ormat O'Cheer and for Nigel Pack and Matthew Cleveland and the freshman who a lot of NBA scouts were looking at. And he got injured the other night. We'll see if he's healthy on Saturday. But that club's got talent, man. Mm-hmm. They've got talent. There's a reason they weren't in the Final Four last year because of Isaiah Wong. It was because of all of them. So who knows? Maybe they have their turning point moment. Maybe that's Saturday with Carolina in town, because they're going to be ticked off because of how they played too. And they're going to be at home. And we've seen Carolina go down there and really lay some eggs. 2 years ago, they were horrible down there. The title team in 17 stunk down there. Mm-hmm. So against a worse Miami team, in my opinion. So Tar Heels need to strap it on, man. They need to strap it on, and they need to get a victory on Saturday, because you have no idea what Miami team's going to show up. This is a club that has gotten blown out multiple times this year, but they're also a club that can put 90 on the board and force Carolina to take good shots on offense. And if Cormac's not hitting, someone else got to take their shots, and it can't always be RJ. So Tar Heels need to play very well to get a win, need to be ready to play, and need to be prepared for a battle, because Miami is going to give them everything it has.
Yeah, it really is a tough couple games coming up. But you're right, it does start in Coral Gables, especially because that's just a place Carolina seems to always struggle when they go down there, similar to Tallahassee and similar to Charlottesville. I think Charlottesville's the extreme in this situation. But yeah, it's a tough two-game stretch coming up.
I'm glad you brought that up. Carolina still they have 4 ACC road games left: at Miami, at Syracuse, at Virginia, at Duke.
I know. Does not get easier.
They host Miami. They still host Virginia Tech, which is weirdly like around 50 in the net. That's one team in the ACC that's higher in the net than what the eye test tells me. But they got a bunch of dudes that can hit 3, so who knows? And they also have State coming in. So Tar Heels need to strap it on, man. Every game they play.
Agree.
And Coral Gables, by the way, one of my favorite places to cover a game.
Yeah, no, you're
big fan of going down there.
Yeah, I know you're looking forward.
And down there Friday morning, Bryant Balcom will cover Hubert's presser on Friday for us. Looking forward to Bryant's work, and I'll be in a plane heading on down there.
Mm-hmm. Enjoy that down there, man. Enjoy some sunshine.
My favorite THI has landed tweet is always THI has landed in Miami.
Yes, sir, man. I don't blame you at all. If you look at the ACC, I think that's probably the best place you can go on the map there. But
I go from the best place. I wouldn't say Syracuse is the worst place. South Bend's the worst place.
But Syracuse, the Miami-Syracuse contrast is about as opposite as it gets. Let's be honest with ourselves, AJ. I mean, you're talking
and I'm going from one to the other. I'm not coming home Sunday because it's just too grueling. Flying from Miami to Syracuse on Monday. So.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. I'd do the same thing if I were you. Maybe extra day in Miami. You can't go wrong with that. But
Yeah, but what am I going to do? I'll get
you'll be on the computer the whole time in the hotel. You'll get your walk in though. That's a nice. You probably rather walk in Miami than Wake Forest, North Carolina, or Raleigh, North Carolina, where you live.
Oh. Yeah, just a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll leave it at this, AJ, because I was talking to my dad earlier today. He's a Carolina fan who were dissecting the game a little bit, and one of the things that I kind of left him with is it's tough loss. Tough 3-game stretch besides the Duke game for North Carolina when you look at, losing 2 out of the last 3 to, Georgia Tech, who's not very good, but I think are on the up and up as a program a little bit, and a Clemson team that I think is a lot better than their record shows. But I said, I think this team is, when you look at the experience it has and just the age it has on the team and the fact that a lot of guys, this is kind of their last go around with it. If there's any team that can learn from this and use it as a stepping stone to help them later in the road in April, in March, if they can make it that far, I think it's this North Carolina team. So like you said earlier, I'm not going to say this loss is maybe a blessing in disguise, but I think this loss is a bigger wake-up call from a Carolina perspective than I think the Georgia Tech loss would have been. I think this loss shows if you don't prepare, you can lose to anybody. You can lose to anybody.
I will add to that, if there's any team in America in which there's no excuse not to do what you just said, it's this one as well. There's no excuse for them not to do what you just said. If they don't do it, then it's completely on them. And it's on the staff. It's on everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody over there in the program. So they have to do what you just said. Otherwise, they're going to get clobbered by people, not just on the court, but otherwise. And we'll see. Let's wait and see what happens. Yeah. I'm looking forward to this weekend. This is a big test for them. And I can't wait to see how they defend. I think if they try to switch like crazy against Miami, they're going to get killed on defense.
Agreed.
Miami's going to push it. They're going to get pop outs for 3, drive and dish outs and all that kind of stuff. So I think they have to go back to not switching as much defensively. The one thing is that Miami's not big. So if RJ gets on Normad, then he won't be on a 6'10 guy, 6'11 guy, but
does not need to do that.
He should not be down there on the block. Period.
Nah, it's a recipe for disaster, especially against PJ Hall and guys like that. It's not going to work out for you too well. Shefflin as well. So we'll see what happens on Saturday. Carolina comes ready to play against Miami. I think they win that game, but I think they, based on what happened against Clemson, if this team, it really is what we think they can be, they'll be ready to play on Saturday and should be able to get a win down.
I think they win the next 2.
I do too.
They win the next 2.
I do too. And if they don't, then we'll be on a UNC basketball show to talk about it and try to figure out what the heck's going on in Chapel Hill. But I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Another episode of the UNC basketball show. Got some drops coming on later this week as well. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell as well. And guys, if you want to sign up, $8.33 a month, TarHillIllustrated.com. We did have an awesome promo we talked about on our 3 things and before the Duke game and during the Duke game. If you missed out on that, unfortunate. Hopefully I have some more promos in the future, but still $8.33 a month. Link is in the description below. Head on over there and get signed up. You won't regret it when you do, and you can be a Carolina insider too. Appreciate you guys watching. See y'all next time. Thanks.